Oscar De La Hoya laughs and pokes at Canelo Alvarez once again. Ha, I took you off of your date, punk, just like I told you I would. I fight for my people in September. So we all know that Canelo Alvarez and Oscar De La Hoya, they've been beefing ever since Canelo Alvarez left Golden Boy. Now, when Canelo Alvarez left Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya, you could tell right off the bat that he was very, very bitter about Canelo Alvarez leaving his organization, Golden Boy Promotions. And I can see why. You know, Oscar De La Hoya, he had a hell of a stable of fighters. He had, you know, all of the superstar fighters, most of all the superstar fighters that's at the top of the game right now that you see in boxing. Oscar De La Hoya had all of those fighters. But you know, he lost all of those fighters, and instead of trying to get those fighters back, he put all of his eggs in one basket, and he put all of his money and everything he had into Canelo Alvarez and making Canelo Alvarez a superstar. So now that Canelo Alvarez has left Oscar De La Hoya and virtually left him with no superstar on his roster at all, Oscar De La Hoya, he feels some type of way about it. And every time Oscar De La Hoya gets a chance to speak, he lets people know how he feels about Canelo Alvarez. Now, he's disrespected Canelo Alvarez many a time since Canelo Alvarez left Golden Boy Promotions. But one thing that stuck out to me is Oscar De La Hoya promised that he would take Canelo Alvarez's September fight date from him, and Canelo Alvarez would not be fighting in September, right? Because if you don't know, Canelo Alvarez came out and he announced that he would be fighting on September the 18th. Now, September the 16th is Mexican Independence holiday. When Oscar De La Hoya found that information out, he immediately came out and he said that he was going to knock Canelo Alvarez off of his fight date because he says that he has more star power and Canelo Alvarez could never compete with him. That's what Oscar De La Hoya said. And so it was kind of comical at first, but Oscar De La Hoya, he not too long after that, he came out and he announced that he was going to be fighting on September the 11th. That is the Saturday before Mexican Independence holiday, right? That's that Saturday before on 9/11. So it was like, okay, this is getting interesting now. Canelo Alvarez is fighting September the 18th, but the week ahead before that, Oscar De La Hoya will be making his comeback on pay-per-view against Vitor Belfort on September the 11th. So it was like, oh man, okay, that's a conflict of interest because what pay-per-view are you gonna buy? You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like, would Oscar De La Hoya's pay-per-view buys affect Canelo Alvarez's pay-per-view buys that very next weekend? So who was going to basically take the throne? Who was going to take the throne and who was going to get moved off of their date and who was going to keep their September fight date? Recently, we found out who was moved off of their date and we found out who kept the fight date. Now, recently, we know that Canelo Alvarez is no longer going to be fighting on that September the 18th date, that Canelo Alvarez won't be even fighting until November, you know, because negotiations that he had with Caleb Plant, they fell apart, and negotiations that he had with Dimitri Bivol, they fell apart for the moment. So it's just been a whole big mess with Canelo Alvarez. Now, Oscar De La Hoya, he's basically taking the credit for that. He's saying that he is the reason why Canelo Alvarez is no longer fighting in September because he could not compete with Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya is basically, you know, sticking his tongue out on some boo-boo shit like, hey, I told you, ha ha ha. You know, he's laughing at Canelo Alvarez, telling him, I told you that you weren't going to be fighting in September because you can't compete with me. I am the real Mexican superstar. Now, however you feel about that, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, you know, I know that Canelo Alvarez moving off of that September fight date, it didn't have anything to do with Oscar De La Hoya, but it's funny. You know, it's funny because Oscar De La Hoya, he continues to poke and jab at Canelo Alvarez. Now, one thing I do want to say about this is Oscar De La Hoya, when they was going back and forth in the media, you know, well, they wasn't even really going back and forth. It was Oscar De La Hoya poking and jabbing at Canelo Alvarez. One thing Oscar De La Hoya said about Canelo, he said that Canelo Alvarez had been ducking certain fighters. And he said that Canelo Alvarez was staying away from certain styles of fighters, right? Ed kind of laughed at the situation, right? I really didn't pay it no attention because, you know, I'm a Canelo Alvarez fan and I took up for Canelo, right? Now, everything is coming full circle, right? Because Canelo Alvarez, he had responded and he had said, look, you know, I'm glad to be a free agent. A lot of the fights that I weren't able to make, that the fans wanted to see me fight, it wasn't because of me. It was because of the promotional company I was with. Basically blaming it on Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya keeping him from fighting, you know, the certain fighters that the fans want to see him in the ring with. So when Canelo Alvarez said that, I believed it. I said, okay. But Oscar De La Hoya, he said a different thing, you know, and I kind of looked at the whole situation as just, you know, Oscar De La Hoya was jealous. You know, he was jealous of Canelo Alvarez, jealous because Canelo Alvarez left him and all of that, which he is, you know, let's keep it real, he is. But some of what Oscar De La Hoya was saying is starting to look real familiar right now. With how these negotiations were playing out with Canelo Alvarez, right? Making all type of horrible demands and expecting, you know, the fighters that he's getting in the ring with to accept. One point in time, people were wondering, was it Canelo Alvarez always making up these catch weights and dehydration clauses and this and that? Or was it Oscar De La Hoya advising Canelo Alvarez to do these things? Well, Oscar De La Hoya, he's come out and he's let it be known that, hey, Canelo's a diva. You know, we've always had these problems with him demanding these certain things in his fights. Now, we starting to see that it's no Oscar De La Hoya anymore, but we still seeing the same Canelo Alvarez. You know, we still seeing Canelo make these just crazy, outrageous demands. You know, and that's the reason that the Caleb Plant fight fell out. You know, and that's the reason why Demetrius Bivol and Canelo Alvarez won't be getting in the ring in September. So now that everybody sees that it wasn't Oscar De La Hoya, that it is Canelo Alvarez making all of these demands on his own, and that was Canelo Alvarez making catch weights at 155 and 156, right? Because honestly, nobody knew if it was Canelo Alvarez or if it was Oscar De La Hoya trying to get the advantage for his fighter. But now we see that there's no Oscar De La Hoya around anymore. So Oscar De La Hoya is saying, look, this is why Canelo Alvarez will never be a true Mexican warrior like I was. Right? He's saying that true Mexican fighters like myself, true warriors like myself, we don't duck nobody. We fight everybody. We don't try to get advantages. We don't do all of that. We just go in there and we fight the best, win, lose, or draw. And, you know, Oscar De La Hoya, if you look at his career, he has a point. One thing Oscar De La Hoya didn't do is he never ducked no smoke. And one thing Oscar De La Hoya did do is he fought any and everybody that was around in his era. It wasn't none of the fighters that Oscar De La Hoya wouldn't fight. And he went in there and he performed in every fight that he was ever in. And so he's telling the fans, he's like, look, this guy is not a real Mexican warrior like I was, like Julio Cesar Chavez was. This guy is a diva. Look at all the diva demands that he makes. That's why he will never be able to fight on the Mexican independence holiday and get the respect of the real Mexican fan base like I once did. Now, you know, whether that's all true or not, I don't know. That's up for y'all to decide. But one thing that is true is that we see what Canelo Alvarez has been doing throughout his whole career. Canelo Alvarez, he tries to get any and every little advantage in the fight that he can. Now, when Oscar De La Hoya says that Canelo Alvarez didn't want to fight certain fighters and he was ducking certain fighters, is it true? Is Oscar De La Hoya telling the truth? Was Canelo Alvarez demanding Oscar De La Hoya not to put him in the ring with certain fighters? Was Canelo Alvarez ducking certain fighters? I don't know. Only Oscar De La Hoya and Canelo Alvarez and their team will really know at the end of the day. But one thing I do know is that Canelo Alvarez left Oscar De La Hoya and said that he was going to get himself in a position to where he was going to be a free agent, to where he can move around and make all of the fights that he wants to make without any problems. I know that was a lie, because what he did is he left one promoter and went straight to another promoter. Now he's with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, and because he's with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Promotions is the reason why the fight on PBC pay-per-view with Caleb Plant fell through. That's the reason why that fight wasn't happening. But I'll tell you the whole story on what happened behind the scenes with that in another video. But you know, y'all let me know how y'all feel about this situation with Oscar De La Hoya and Canelo Alvarez. Is Canelo Alvarez a big mega superstar like Oscar De La Hoya once was? And if not, will Canelo Alvarez ever hit the superstardom that Oscar De La Hoya once was? And also, let me know, do y'all think that Oscar De La Hoya fighting a week before the September the 18th date that Canelo Alvarez was supposed to fight on, do y'all think that that has something to do with Canelo Alvarez just saying, you know, fuck it, I'm not fighting in September at all, I'm gonna move to November? Or do y'all think that, you know, it was because of the negotiations with the fighters that he was trying to get in the ring with, you know, time was just running out? Let me know what y'all think about this whole situation. And also in the comment section, let me know if you're going to watch the Oscar De La Hoya and Vitor Belfort pay-per-view. Anyway, before I get up out of here, make sure that y'all hit my like button, and y'all already know how I do. There you go, talking that boxing again. And sub to the channel. I'm gone.